I assume, regardless of what governance model you use, that the next superintendent will be making that argument either to present school board directors or to the mayor, if the mayor is the person in control. I do believe that the issues that this district is facing, both from an educational standpoint, which is what our focus is today and what it should be today, but as Representative Malone referred to as well, fiscal challenges are enormous. And I believe that this is not the last chapter in this book. That regardless of what happens here today or happens in the next month, that the pressures that are on this district are so immense that we will continue to have this dialogue as to what tools are necessary, either for the next superintendent, the next board, the next mayor, whomever that person is, or whoever that governing entity is, because this issue is so important and the challenges are so great.
I guess the reason I say it is I remember talking to Dr. Fuller, who was a former superintendent, and reading an article that he wrote that stated that a lot of things that he wanted to do to change MPS, he couldn't do because the teacher's contract is so prescriptive that he wanted to make changes in how the operation runs, but he ran against a brick wall because that wasn't in the contract. And I'm concerned that, we're just dealing with saying, well, the board, there's issues with the board and, all that changes and everything. But then when you get right down to running the place, I think the new superintendent is going to have his hands tied, or her hands tied, just exactly the same way the existing superintendent has, or the superintendent that the board will hire if they take it. I guess I'm really concerned that this is not nearly deep enough to help MPS make the changes because the tools aren't there.
I think it goes back to the issue of finger pointing, the issue of accountability. And this comes from my conversations in other communities, other cities that have mayoral governments. The common denominators that are here there are that the mayor, as a chief elected officer, when he or she chooses the superintendent of schools, says to the person, you will be held accountable. But at the same time says, in essence, I will have your back. I know that you're going to have to make tough changes. And that you will have support from me because it's important that these changes are made. I think that these changes can be made by working with the union. This is not, as Senator Taylor said, in any type of Trojan horse to defeat the union or to battle the union. And the reason for that is I think that we share the belief that people who go into education, who go into teaching, do so because they love children. They love children, that's why they went into teaching. But we also have to recognize the realities that we face as a community, as a state, of the fiscal pressures that we're dealing with. And I think if you have that open dialogue, I think that you can have change that we haven't been able to have thus far that will allow us, and again, I think to a person, we would agree with this, to get more dollars into the classroom. That's what we want to do, is get more dollars into the classroom to educate.
Well, I guess that's well and good, and we want to do that. But let me just read a little sentence, if I could, that Superintendent Anacopoulos wrote to Tony Hughes. This was October 21st, 2009. And the issue was, and the state superintendent was, it said here, you're asking and requiring our teachers to participate in specific professional development activities that are contrary to the terms of the current labor agreement. So what was going on here is, it was just that you need to offer your teachers some professional development, and the superintendent says, yeah, I'd like to, but the contract doesn't let me do it. And I guess those are the kind of things, after talking to a number of people in Milwaukee, that this governance thing is part of it. But if you don't have the authority to come in and make changes like they did and are doing in Washington, D.C., where the superintendent shut down 23 schools, fired 36 principals, terminated 250 teachers and 500 aides, if you don't have that power, I'm concerned that no matter who appoints the superintendent, there will be failure. and you would be held accountable for something that you don't have the tools to do.
Mr. Chair, may I address Senator Olson's question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Senator Olson, two things. First, I understand what you're saying. You're referring to things, for example, in the contract that presently say that a principal cannot require a teacher to do professional development. And you're referring to other issues that are like that, that create challenges. However, you know, not trying to go back and forth to agree or disagree with you on that piece. Other places that have done mayoral governance change have not necessarily had the collective bargaining pieces that you speak to and have been able to address the lowest quartile of students and the change that I talk about. Chicago is really one of the only districts that really in their legislation put those kind of collective bargaining pieces in that strict the contracts. That's not what this legislation does. However, what this legislation does do to address the issues that you spoke about, in low-performing schools, in schools that are extremely low-performing, the superintendent has the ability to place teachers and principals regardless of seniority. Because of that, I believe that it sets another tone for negotiations, as well as to be able to address some of the opening and closing of school issues that you speak to. And those are pieces of legislation that are presently on the books but could not be used for constitutional reasons that I can explain later. So I think that we will be able to address the issues that you spoke about because there will be a different tone. This is just one step in the many things that you need to do. And this is why I spoke that it's not anti-union, because we are not going in and doing what they did in Chicago, and in DC they did not do that. That superintendent is working within the parameters of just renegotiating issues.
Senator Hansen? Senator Grossman?
Thanks for bringing us to Milwaukee. I hope you let us ask a lot of questions because a lot of the problems we have in the state are focused on Milwaukee. It's very important that the next generation of children in Milwaukee not deal with the problems we've had in the past. First question for Mayor Baird. We talked about failed policies in the past. Which policies would you like to see changed or be newly implemented if this bill is passed?
I think some of it is the focus. Obviously, what we have had is we've had far too great a dropout rate, so I think we need effective programs.
I'm not talking about results. There's no question the results are there. The question is what policies do you want to change?
I want us to have policies that will allow us to address failing schools, that bottom quartile that Senator Taylor referred to, much more quickly. That if you have, whether it's a principal, whether it's teachers, whether it's whatever it is in a school, if we have a school that is constantly in the bottom 25, 15%, I don't believe that we can act quickly enough to make those changes.
Well, that's not a policy. I know we need change. But the question is, what policies do you envision being implemented by the new superintendent that did not have implemented?
The superintendent having the authority to bring in a new principal and new teachers into a failed school. Okay, I don't think we have that. I don't think we have that adequately now.
Okay, now you have a follow-up question to that, which kind of comes to what Senator Olson said. I've talked to people in Milwaukee public schools, and even more than other schools, this is a problem all over the state, but even more than in other schools, they feel the biggest problem is that if you have a bad teacher or a bad administrator, you cannot get rid of them. They just keep dancing around the system. One of the problems I see in this bill, and I assume if the bill passes, it's going to be amended, and the other 56-page bill out there, bills that size don't pass without being amended. Would you be supportive, Mayor Baird, of getting out in front and changing this legislation to make it much easier in the future for a superintendent to dismiss a bad teacher or bad principal?
I would be happy to work with you and all members of the committee to make sure that we have language in there that meets the goal of getting rid of the bad teachers. That doesn't mean I necessarily agree with your language or maybe someone else's language, but I'm happy to work with you on that issue.
That's good, because when I talk to people in MPS, that just raises the single biggest problem. You get a bad teacher in MPS or a bad principal, and you just cannot get rid of them. The best you can do is you can switch into some other class where they're a cancer for some other class.
But I also don't want us to kick around the good teachers, and I think that that's one of the other dangers here, is that people who come and teach in this district are teaching kids who have a lot more challenges than most kids in the state, and I think we have to recognize that as well.
I'll give you one final question, and then I'll wrap up. Mayor Baird, one of the things that concern me, one of the problems I have, I represent West Bend, and probably like everywhere else around the state, my administrator and school board sometimes complain about lack of money. Milwaukee spends significantly more money than West Bend, and in the 15 years I've been in the legislature, we've greatly increased the amount of money that funds in Milwaukee.